This movie is going to show how to use the centering template and pattern pieces provided with the Easy Complete Quilt to make a table runner in a hexagon shape. So what you're going to need to start out is you're going to need to cut 7 pieces out of the hexagon face. We're going to put that aside. We're not going to work with that for a little while. That comes at the very end. And then you need 7 pieces cut from the piece marked back. And you need 7 pieces cut from the piece marked lining, fleece, and lining. And of course, you're going to need your centering template, but not for a little while. This is red because it doesn't reflect the light as drastically as the green, so that's why I'm using that for this video. Easy Complete Quilt squares are made by putting the batting on top of the actual back piece, and sewing them together and lining them. Since you're lining them inside out, you have to pull them to the right side. So to prevent one of the pieces from being stretched out too much when you pull the pieces through to the right side, the first step in making this particular project is to stay stitch. This is a 1/4 inch. If this is a 1/4 inch, you want to stay stitched closer to the edge of the cut edge of the fabric than the seam allowance. So you want to follow this line roughly to stay stitch. And you only have to do it on one of the corners of each piece. What is stay stitching? Stay stitching is a way to reinforce fabric that's going to be under stress, as this area will be when we flip the product from the inside to the outside. It's a single row of stitching. It never has any securing methods on either end, so you wouldn't back stitch or anything like that. And it's always placed so it falls within the seam allowance. In other words, this is a 1/4 inch. My stay stitching should fall between that 1/4 inch and the cut edge of the fabric. If it falls outside of the seam allowance, it will probably show when construction is complete. If that happens, I have to rip it out. Stay stitching is normally done with regular stitch length or shorter. So I'm using 1.8 millimeters. So these stitches are very close and they're going to be difficult to rip out. So try and keep it between the seam allowance and the cut edge. So I've stay stitched one side, one corner of each of the back pieces and also the fleece pieces. And now I'm just going to use one to show you what to do next. Now I've stay stitched so the orange thread, I have orange thread in my top thread and black thread in my bobbin. I stay stitched so the orange thread is actually on the wrong side of the fabric. So if I flip it this way, there's a lot more black thread showing. Now that we've gone over stay stitching, it's time to begin assembling the quilt pieces. So I'm going to take the back and I'm going to lay it right sides up, and I'm going to position the fleece on top of it, right sides together. So this is the right side and this is the right side, and the fusing agent's on this side. I'm going to join the pieces along the long edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm using really small stitches because I'm using quilter stitches. So I do not secure my threads at this end, but I definitely do at this end. Wherever they encounter something that's going to be under stress, I do back stitch or some sort of securing of threads. I'm just going to sew this seam and I'll be right back. Here's my seam. This edge is not secured. This edge has back stitching. Now, none of the other pieces seem to match. However, if you pull the batting and position it so the raw edges meet with the back of the quilt block, you will see that they do meet. You just have to manipulate the fabric. I'm going to go over to the sewing machine. I'm actually going to sew from this side because I'm not going to secure my stitches here, but I am going to secure them at this end. And sometimes I find back stitching can cause a little curl or something if you start with it with a 1/4 inch seam. So that's why I'm not going to back stitch, and I'm actually going to sew from this end towards the reinforcement stitching. Here we go. Now that these two edges are done, I'm simply going to do the same all around. And I'm going to do the same thing with all of my hexagon quilt blocks. When you finish sewing all the way around your hexagon, it looks like this on the fleece side, the quilting fleece. On the other side, it kind of puffs up and won't lay flat. That's what you're going for. Because we're going to flip this to the right side, we have to remember that the fleece is not going to fold as easily as the fabric. So it's actually going to fight the flip. So when I have fleece here, not fabric, I trim the fleece to 1/8 inch. Only the fleece. I don't trim the fabric because I think that makes it a little bit weak. There's a little trick I use. It's twisting the fabric in a column once you have the turning started. So I'm going to pull all the fabric through the stay stitched edges. So first I'm just going to turn the edges just a little to get it kind of started. And I'm very gentle with the batting. If I'm going to tug anything, it's more likely to be the fabric. Okay, now that I've got it started, I twist the fabric to compress it, and then I kind of pull the opening over top of the compressed areas. And this way I reduce the amount of distortion in the opening. There will be some, and occasionally I'll steam the pieces and let them rest before construction because of that, if you have time. Once all the fabric is inside that opening, you can start kind of gently tugging on the other end and simply complete pulling the back to the right side. I'm just going to pull a little on the top to make some extra room in this space. Okay, now I can start kind of gently pulling from the top. And I'm pulling mainly on the fabric, not the batting. Make sure you have this nice edge all around. Sometimes if you don't get these nice edges, you can use a chopstick or a large knitting needle to kind of pull them into position. Notice how this one side kind of curves. That'll be okay. It won't impact the quality of my quilt when it's finished. Here's the back after it's been pressed and the fusing agent's been activated, and it's all set now to mark and join to the other quilt backs.